Hello 3E Pure Geographers, this is Mr. Ahmad. As you know, I'm out for a seminar on health and disease, so I'm unable to be there with you in class. However, as promised, this is the video casted lesson that we'll do on mangroves. Okay? Hopefully you guys can follow through this lesson. If it's going too fast, please kindly ask the teacher to pause the video so that you can copy down all the important notes into your geo handbook. So let's get on with the lesson proper. As a quick recap, these are the things you should ask yourself. If you can remember them, good. If you can't, then it's time to go back and flip through those pages again. So what is the distribution of coral reefs? Name 3 environmental conditions that are important for the growth of coral reefs. Using specific examples, explain the pressures on coral reef ecosystems. And throughout this lesson, you will realize that there are some similarities between coral reefs and mangroves and how they are being affected by the coastal ecosystem around them. So today's topic is, why are mangrove ecosystems distinctive and valuable? The lesson agenda for today will be what are mangroves, the distribution of mangroves, environmental conditions affecting the growth of mangroves, the value of mangroves, the pressures of mangroves. Then after that, we'll move on to threats to coastal areas. This is nothing to do with mangroves. It's just a whole different chapter, just the last bit. And finally, there'll be some work for you to do. Okay? So let's begin the lesson. The first question is, what are mangrove ecosystems? Well, mangrove species are salt tolerant and they are called halophytes. Okay, which means they are vegetation that can grow very well in highly saline conditions. So they grow in tidal mud on sheltered coasts. This is something we've mentioned before in the regulating services bit. They are also home to many unique communities of plants and animals. Again, we've touched upon them under supporting services in the previous chapter. Okay, so we've talked about how mud lobsters thrive in those conditions, how the prop roots can actually support fish nurseries under them. The next thing that we'll talk about is the distribution of mangroves. So mangroves are found generally between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. However, unlike the coral reefs, which are found anywhere where it's favorable to them, mangroves are usually only found along sheltered coasts. If it's in the open waters, strong waves may erode the seeds and therefore they cannot thrive in those conditions. And where can they be found? Mangroves are most abundant on tropical coastlines such as the Malay Peninsula, Borneo, New Guinea, and Northern Australia. The next thing you need to know are the environmental conditions affecting the growth of mangroves. As we mentioned at the start, mangroves are halophytes, therefore they are adapted to saline environment. And unlike most other vegetation types, mangroves show patterns of horizontal zonation instead of vertical layers, and they are known as coastal zone, middle zone, and the inland zone. And some other things that you need to know, there are 3 types of roots that can be found in a mangrove ecosystem. They are breathing or pencil-like roots, prop roots, and need roots. So let's try and talk more about the mangrove root types. The breathing roots are usually found in the coastal zones. What are breathing roots for? It is to help the trees breathe during low tide, because it is usually submerged during the high tide. Prop roots are usually found in the middle zone. It essentially props the trees above the high tide mark, as you can see in the picture below. Need roots are usually found in the inland zone. What need roots do is to help anchor the trees firmly into the muddy ground. And of course, after that, we will talk about the value of mangroves. They play a key role in stabilizing shorelines, as we've mentioned in the regulating of services. They are also breeding grounds and habitats for a range of marine creatures. Mangroves also provide wood for fuel, construction, and producing charcoal. Mangroves also help improve water quality, and also mangrove acts as a natural filter for biodegradable waste. There are also pressures that the mangroves face. Due to their function as fuel wood and charcoal, they are now highly endangered in Indonesia simply because they are being used for these provisions. And as you've learned in Kamau, Vietnam, Mangrove forests are being cleared to make way for more farming areas, in which case in Vietnam were the shrimp farms. Mangroves are also being cleared in the Caribbean islands due to land reclamation. And although mangroves have the ability to act as a natural filter, when there's too much water pollution, the mangroves will be overwhelmed and will eventually die. Another issue will be the rising sea level, as seen in the Gulf of Thailand. This is where the mangroves will start getting flooded, so coastal zone trees that have breathing roots, which are supposed to breathe during the low tide, will still suffocate because now, with the rising sea levels, the low tide gets higher. And with that, we've come to the end of the mangrove chapter. Now, we will move on to the final parts of Gateway 2, which is the threats to coastal areas. There are 5 main coastal threats that you should know of: climate change, eroding shorelines, rising populations, coastal development and habitat loss, and finally, pollution. The first threat is climate change. With rising sea levels, low-lying coasts will easily disappear. The fast pace of sea level rise would also mean that ecosystems do not have enough time to adapt to the changes and will eventually just die. Here's a video on what Florida is doing to deal with this issue of climate change and rising sea levels.
Parched terrain where almost nothing can grow. This part of the Florida Keys island chain was once home to a large pine forest. But Chris Berg says rising sea levels have made the groundwater increasingly salty, destroying the ecosystem.
What used to be a thriving pine forest used to support key deer, used to support freshwater dependent wildlife. Now does still support certain animals, but not those freshwater dependent species.
Florida officials are now predicting that the sea level will rise at an alarming rate, 60 centimeters over the next 50 years. Berg observes the potential impact of these numbers, simulated on a computer map.
4 feet is the highest amount of sea level rise that we modeled, and you can see there's very little land. This is the highest point of Big Pine here that is not affected.
The low-lying island of Key West would also be affected if this prediction comes true. With 25,000 residents, it's the most populated and visited island in the Keys. Tourism makes up 80% of its economy.
I think it would probably change a few things. We would have to adapt. How we'd adapt, I'm not really sure.
Locals will have no choice because the trend is irreversible. One way to escape the sea level's rise is to build up, like this elevated fire station.
This is just the first of our building, but we are planning now on building all of our new county facilities extra elevated to account for the sea level rise.
Roads, parks, and bridges here will all eventually be built higher up, a measure that could one day be necessary for coastal cities like Boston or New York.
The next threat to coastal areas is eroding shorelines. With climate change, it is expected to have more storms. So with more frequent and more severe storms, storm surges and destructive waves will become more prominent, thus eroding more of the coastline. The next threat is the issue of rising populations. With more than 3 billion people living near coastlines, there is also a chance of an increasing number of people who will move towards the coast by 2015. This could be due to aesthetic reasons, this could be due to supporting reasons, could be due to recreational reasons, could be due to the other services that the coast provides. However, with increased populations, there will be greater strain on the resources near the coast for food, space, and other developments. The next threat is something that could be stemmed from the rising populations. With increasing coastal developments due to increased number of people living near the coast, other life forms habitats such as coral reefs and mangroves will definitely be in danger of being cleared. Finally comes the threat of pollution. With increasing population and development, pollution of the sea has also increased. As you guys have told me yesterday, you guys know that there is a mass of garbage called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that's been referred to as a continent due to its sheer size and expense. Okay, do yourself this small little favor. Go home, go YouTube and type Great Pacific Garbage Patch Vice, V-I-C-E. There's a pretty good documentary on it. you guys will get to see how the Great Pacific Garbage Patch really looks like and how it's affecting the ecosystems around it. And with that, we end Gateway 2. And because I am not there to help you out, please reserve all your questions, write it on a piece of paper, ask me when we meet each other again next week. Okay? I understand because I'm not there, you may have 1,000,001 questions about mangroves, but it's okay. Just write it down somewhere and we will settle it together next week. But now it's time to work, so please take that half sheet of paper, do it on a separate piece of foolscap. Once you're done, please staple it as per normal, and could you hand it up to the teacher in front. Thank you very much, 3E.